Good morning. Welcome to another session on environmental impact assessment.
So we shall continue with Unit 2 Methodologies. Course outcome. Elucidate the methods of EAA with case studies. Learning outcome. Discuss methods used in EAA. Specific outcomes. Explanation of the checklist method of EAA. We already seen the simple checklist method. In this session, we will be looking closely at descriptive checklist method. So descriptive checklists are widely used in environmental impact studies. So the methodology addresses the following issues. Right, so this is just an example of some project dealing with harbor construction. So they listed out the activities of the particular project: reprap, replacement, bulkheads. So this is something dealing with replacing the surface with some stones, or not just replacing the surface. Maybe you are just it is a normal ground surface which you are patching with some stones. Groins and jetties, piers, dolphins, mooring piles, ramp construction, dredging, outfalls, submerged lines and pipes, aerial crossings. So these are all activities which are related to the harbor project, right? So we're not going to into the explanation of each one of them. Why? Because um, it's a specialized area, and we are not going to. I'm not going to explain all those things. Why? Because our focus here is to explain about the descriptive checklist and not all the parameters, not all the factors which are involved in, the construction project of a harbor, right? So these are some of the actions. So what you do is you list out all the actions of the project. For each of the items, environmental impact information was provided on potential changes in soil erosion, sedimentation, deposition, flood heights, right, water quality, ecology, air quality, noise, safety, navigation, recreation, aesthetics, and socioeconomics. So for all of these activities they have uh, identified which factor is going to get affected, right? So important characteristics of simple and descriptive checklist. So before we go into an example of the descriptive checklist, we will see some of the characteristics of this simple and descriptive checklist. Simple and descriptive checklist consider environmental factors and or impacts, right, which can be helpful in planning and conducting an environmental impact statement. Or to say, it is, I think here it is conducting an environmental impact study, right? Particularly if one or more checklists for specific project type can be utilized, right? So published agency checklists and or project specific checklists represent the collective professional knowledge and judgment of their developers. Hence, they have professional credibility and usability. For example, for some of the projects, already some checklists will be available, right, which represents the collective professional knowledge, right, and judgment of the developers, and they are generally used, right? So, but that will not be available with some common man. You will have to go to some environmental consultant also who has already made this checklist for some specific projects. Why? Because he's dealing with the EA clearance and so on. So you can get it only from them. Checklists provide a structured approach for identifying the key impacts and or pertinent environmental factors for consideration in impact studies. More extensive list of factors of impacts do not necessarily represent better list, since relevant factors or impacts will need to be selected. Simply having some 100 environmental factors doesn't mean that you have made your you know mm, you have made a very good checklist. Does not mean that the checklist is good simply because there are so many factors. Only those relevant factors or impacts have to be identified and selected, then your checklist is good, right? Checklist can be easily modified. Items can be added, deleted to make them more pertinent or to make them more suitable for a particular project type for a given location. Checklists can be used to stimulate or facilitate interdisciplinarity in discussion during the planning, construction, and summarization of the environmental impact statements, right? Actually, it is environmental impact statement (EIS). It's not studies. Sorry, but it is an environmental impact statement. So checklists can facilitate or it can induce discussion among interdisciplinary team members during the planning, construction, summarization phase of the environmental impact statement preparation. In using a checklist, it is important to carefully define the utilized spatial boundaries and environmental factors. Any special impact code or terminology used within the checklist should also be defined. Documentation of the rational basics to identifying key factors and impacts should be accomplished. The reason or on what basis these factors have been included, on what factors the impacts have been identified, that documentation should be there. In this regard, factor impact quantification and comparison to pertinent standards can be helpful, right? So the standards that are required for air, water, right, soil, so on, those documents will be very helpful at this stage. Factors and or impacts from a simple or descriptive checklist can be grouped together to demonstrate secondary and tertiary impacts and or environmental system relationships. The factors and impacts from a simple or descriptive checklist can be grouped together to demonstrate secondary and tertiary impacts. So we have seen that in the previous session that simple and descriptive actually don't deal with secondary and tertiary impacts, right? Very rarely you can get the secondary and tertiary impacts from the descriptive checklist, but it is possible if you group some of them, right? So that task has to be done, then only you can get the secondary and tertiary impacts. Simply from a particular checklist you cannot get those secondary and tertiary impacts. Important weights could be assigned to key environmental factors or impacts. The rationale and methodology for such importance weight assignment should be clearly specified. Key impacts which should be mitigated can be identified through system usage of a simple or descriptive checklist. So this is an example of a checklist method, right? So here what they do is we have seen an example of a simple checklist in the last session, if you remember or not, I don't know, regarding some road project, right? We had listed down all the environmental factors and we had simply mapped whether it is positive impact or negative impact. Here what they are doing, you can see that they have just not listed the major components, but in each of those components they have actually segregated the different activities. For example, land transportation and construction. So here what they are saying is that they are looking at compaction, erosion, ground cover, deposition, stability, floods, stress strain, waste control, drilling, operation failures. Meaning in the construction, these are all construction activities, right? These are all construction activities which is pertaining to that particular project, right? So land transportation, this thing. So they are listing down all the activities in detail, which was not done in the last simple checklist. We had just listed down only some of the factors and how they are mapped to the positive impacts or negative impacts. Here it is not like that. We are listing down each of the activities which are involved in the construction phase. Now coming to the land use phase. In case of the land use, you got open space, recreational failure, agriculture, residential, commercial, industrial. So for which activity this land use is going to be used? So they again segregated all those things. Water resources, quality, irrigation, groundwater, right? So they segregated the water resources into three categories. Air quality, again oxides, particulate matter, chemicals, odors, gases. Service systems, schools, police, fire protection, water and power system, sewerage system, reuse disposal system, biological conditions, wildlife, trees, scrubs, grasses, so on, right? So they are segregating each of those factors into various other factors, right? So you can see on the right hand side of this particular table, they have something called the construction phase, they have something called the operating phase. They are not here. What we are doing is we are not just simply mapping to positive and negative impacts. We are going to see, obviously here also we are going to map to positive and negative. So you can see the adverse effect, no effect, beneficial effect, but we are going to look at phase by phase, right? What happens in the construction phase, what will happen in the operating phase, and so on. So it is a more detailed checklist. That's why it is called as descriptive checklist, right? Some more category: transportation systems, automobiles, trucks, safety, movement, right? Noise and vibration on the site, off the site. On the site is wherever your building construction is going to go on, that is on the site. Off the site is in the surrounding areas, what kind of impact it will have, the noise and vibration, aesthetics, that is scenery, the structures, how it is going to look, whether it's going to have positive impact, no impact, negative impact. So during the construction phase you may have something, during the operation phase you may have something else, right? So they segregated them into different phases of the project. So here what they have done is they have got all the parameters, right? What are the key processes that are shown in the first column? Just like we seen in the last table, they again segregated them, each of them, into uh, various subcategories, and then in the last column you can see that they have denoted L, P and N. L is completely satisfied, P is partially satisfied, N is not satisfied at all. So this is another way of doing it, right? This is another way of doing or listing down the descriptive checklist. So we'll stop this session over here. We'll continue with the remaining checklist in the next session. Thank you.
Thus, we come to the end of this session. Thank you for your participation. Looking forward to meeting you in the next session.